My 8-year-old daughter suddenly collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, the nurse said, your family was just in her room. Right then, my parents and sister walked out laughing. I froze in place. And when I finally stepped into that room, I saw something I can never unsee. The cloudy Seattle sky seemed to reflect Elizabeth Morrison's emotional state. Looking out the research facility window, she watched raindrops silently trailing down the glass, much like the tears on her cheeks. Doctor. Morrison, there's a call from your daughter's school. Her colleague Mary peeked through the laboratory door, pulling Elizabeth back to reality. She hurriedly pulled her cell phone from her lab coat pocket and checked the missed calls. 3 missed calls from the school listed as her emergency contact. Her heart began to race. Thank you, Elizabeth said as she quickly put away her experimental equipment and returned the call. Her fingers, usually steady and composed, were now trembling. Westside Elementary School. This is Elizabeth Morrison. I believe you called about my daughter Harper. Miss Morrison, thank you for calling back. Your daughter collapsed suddenly during class. She's been taken to St. Mary's Hospital. In that moment, Elizabeth's world stopped. She immediately contacted her supervisor to take emergency leave. As she rushed out of the research facility toward the parking lot, her mind was filled with thoughts of Harper. It had been 3 years since Elizabeth began life with her 8-year-old daughter Harper. The divorce from her ex-husband Michael hadn't been amicable, but the one blessing was the angel of a daughter they had created together. Michael had prioritized his career and moved to California, and lately, even his monthly phone calls had become sporadic. While driving, Elizabeth called her parents. Mom, Harper collapsed at school. They said she's been taken to St. Mary's Hospital. Oh my goodness. Martha Bradley's voice was filled with concern. I'll go right away. Your father will come too. Don't worry, Elizabeth. Could you call Vanessa as well? Of course. She shouldn't be in court today. Elizabeth breathed a small sigh of relief at her mother's words. Her parents, George and Martha, were enjoying a comfortable retirement after long careers in healthcare. George had been a respected pediatrician, and Martha a veteran nurse. Her sister Vanessa was a successful lawyer who was enjoying single life. Her parents and sister adored Harper and were always happy to look after her when Elizabeth was busy with work. Recently, as her pharmaceutical development project at the research facility entered a critical phase, she had been working even on weekends. During those times, her parents would often say, "You need to rest and take Harper for the weekend." On the surface, one couldn't ask for a more dependable family, but as she gripped the steering wheel, Elizabeth recalled Harper's recent behavior. Once the most energetic and cheerful child in her class, she had gradually become withdrawn over the past few months. On the way home from school, no matter what Elizabeth asked, Harper would only say nothing. She became particularly quiet after returning from her grandparents' or aunt's home. Elizabeth had excused her own busyness, considering the changes just a phase in growing up. Child psychology books said ages 7 to 8 were when internal development occurred. Plus, the divorce must have had an impact. As she pulled into the hospital parking lot, one thought consumed Elizabeth's mind. Is it my fault? Have I been putting work first and missing the signs Harper was sending? She jumped out of the car and rushed to the hospital entrance. After giving her name at reception, the nurse checked the computer and gave Elizabeth a sympathetic look. Doctor, Summers will speak with you shortly. Please wait in the pediatric ward waiting room. Elizabeth headed to the 4th floor as directed. When the elevator doors opened, she saw children's bright drawings decorating the walls. Normally, such a sight would warm her heart, but today it did nothing to ease her anxiety. Upon reaching the waiting room, a middle-aged female doctor in a white coat approached her. Ms. Morrison, I'm Dr. Summers from Pediatrics. The doctor introduced herself, guiding Elizabeth to a quiet consultation room. First, I want to let you know that your daughter's condition is stable. Her life is not in danger. For a moment, relief washed over Elizabeth, but there was something hesitant in the doctor's expression. But Elizabeth's voice caught. Harper experienced sudden hyperventilation during class, followed by loss of consciousness. Thanks to her teacher's quick response, the ambulance arrived promptly. Doctor, Summers continued, checking the diagnosis on her tablet. Our tests show no physical problems. Blood tests, EKG, and other neurological tests are all within normal ranges. Then why? In our assessment, this is a physical and mental response to extreme stress. Medically, we call it acute stress response, doctor, Summers explained quietly. In children, it often manifests as physical symptoms, especially in sensitive children like Harper. Elizabeth's mind was confused. She couldn't imagine Harper being under such stress. True, she had become somewhat introverted lately, but was there something that might have triggered this? The doctor asked carefully. I don't know. I've been busy with work lately and haven't spent as much time with her as I'd like. But my parents and sister frequently look after her. Elizabeth's words trailed off. Did something happen at school? According to her teacher, there was a My Family presentation in class today. When it was Harper's turn, she suddenly began trembling and hyperventilating. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Harper had been preparing for that project for several weeks. She had collected family photos and made a collage. She had said she would put the finishing touches on it last weekend while staying at her grandparents' house. I want to see my daughter. Elizabeth stood up. Of course, but before that, Doctor. Summers hesitated slightly. Our child psychologist, Dr. Jenkins, also examined her. In her opinion, Harper's condition may not simply be anxiety about a school presentation. There may be something more fundamental going on. Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? Harper was very defensive during her conversation with the psychologist. She tended to avoid certain questions, particularly about her family. Such behavior suggests there might be some source of, the doctor continued, choosing her words carefully, some source of anxiety or fear. Elizabeth stared at the doctor in disbelief. Are you saying my daughter is afraid of something? We're still evaluating the situation, Doctor. Summers answered calmly, but it's important to create an environment where Harper feels safe to talk. Having you nearby will help her feel secure? Elizabeth nodded and followed the doctor into the hallway. Her room is 412, past the nurse's station on the right. As Elizabeth hurried down the hallway, a young nurse at the nurse's station stopped her. Oh, you must be Miss Morrison, Harper's mother. The nurse smiled. Your family was in the room until just a moment ago. They were so concerned. Elizabeth stopped in her tracks. My family. Yes, her grandfather, grandmother, and I believe it was her aunt, the nurse said, trying to recall. They wouldn't leave Harper's side. You really have a loving family. Elizabeth sighed with relief, grateful that her parents and sister had already arrived, and continued toward the room. Just then, laughter came from around the corner. Looking in that direction, Elizabeth saw her parents and sister walking side by side. They were discussing something and laughing with surprising cheerfulness. Despite having just left a hospital room, their expressions showed not a trace of urgency. Dad, Mom, Vanessa, Elizabeth approached them. The three stopped and, noticing Elizabeth, their expressions changed instantly. Her mother, Martha, was the first to speak. Oh, Elizabeth, you've finally arrived. Her voice carried a subtle reproach. Don't worry, Harper is fine. She just needs some rest and she'll be back to normal. What did the doctor say? Just stress, her father George said with medical authority. Children sometimes experience these things, especially. He gave Elizabeth a meaningful look, especially when their home environment is unstable. Vanessa folded her arms and nodded in agreement. Harper is a sensitive child. Perhaps if you made more time for her, this wouldn't have happened. Elizabeth was speechless. Her family was talking as if this situation was her responsibility. Moreover, she couldn't help but notice the disconnect between their laughing demeanor just moments ago and their now stern expressions. I came as soon as I could. I came straight from the research facility, Elizabeth said defensively. Of course, work comes first. As usual, Martha said coldly. Good thing we were there for Harper. Are you leaving? Elizabeth asked, observing their demeanor. Yes, we were going to get something to eat in the cafeteria, George answered. We've been here for hours. Would you like to join us? Harper is sleeping now. For some reason, they seem to be trying to prevent Elizabeth from entering Harper's room. No, I want to see my daughter, Elizabeth said firmly. The three exchanged glances. There was something in their look that Elizabeth couldn't quite read. I see, of course. Martha stepped back. We'll return later. Call us if anything happens. They headed toward the elevator, once again whispering among themselves as they left. Elizabeth was enveloped by a strange feeling. Something wasn't right. Her family's reaction didn't match the gravity of a child being rushed to the hospital. Suppressing the anxiety welling up inside her, Elizabeth approached room 412. She gently opened the door. In the bluish-white fluorescent light of the hospital room, the first thing Elizabeth saw was her daughter's small, curled-up form on the white bed. Harper was lying facing the window, her shoulders trembling slightly. Harper, Elizabeth called gently. The girl responded to her voice and slowly turned around. Elizabeth's heart clenched. Harper's face was wet with tears, and her eyes were wide with fear. It was as if all the light had disappeared from her once bright blue eyes. Mommy! Harper's voice was hoarse and barely audible. You came. The mixture of anxiety and relief in that question stabbed at Elizabeth's heart. It was as if Harper had been afraid she might not come. Of course, honey. Elizabeth rushed to the bed and took hold of her daughter's cold hand. Mommy's here. Everything's going to be all right. Tears welled up in Harper's eyes. She tried to speak but began trembling again. What's wrong? Does something hurt? Elizabeth placed her hand on her daughter's forehead to check for fever. Harper shook her head. It doesn't hurt. What happened? I heard you felt sick at school. Harper stared into her mother's eyes, then suddenly averted her gaze. There was a fear in those eyes that no child should possess. The presentation, she finally managed to say. It was the family presentation. Elizabeth sat in the chair beside the bed, gently stroking her daughter's hand. The one you were preparing for. You said you were going to put the finishing touches on it at Grandma and Grandpa's house. At those words, Harper's body stiffened. She began to tremble violently again, alarming Elizabeth. Harper, are you all right? They told me not to look, Harper suddenly cried out. Don't tell anyone. Confused, Elizabeth tried to understand her daughter's words. What are you talking about? Who told you that? Instead of answering, Harper pointed to the side table next to the bed. There lay her pink tablet, the one Elizabeth had bought her for the school project. The tablet, Elizabeth reached for it. Were you told not to look at this? Harper nodded slightly, quickly adding, if I looked, Grandpa and Grandma would be angry. They said I'd never see you again. A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine. What had her parents told their granddaughter? She picked up the tablet. The lock screen displayed a smiling photo of Elizabeth and Harper taken at the park. What's the password? Elizabeth asked quietly. Heart, mom, star, cat. Harper answered, trembling. Elizabeth entered the password and opened the home screen. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. There were just children's apps and a folder for school assignments. What aren't you supposed to look at? Elizabeth asked gently. Harper hesitantly opened her mouth. Messages. Elizabeth opened the messaging app. There were exchanges between her and Harper, innocent conversations with a few classmates, and a massive number of messages from her parents and sister. The first ones dated back several months, with the most recent from yesterday. Elizabeth opened the first message. The words she read made her blood run cold. Harper, this is Grandma's secret message. Never show this to Mommy. Mommy is too busy and doesn't have time to care about you. But Grandma, Grandpa, and Aunt Vanessa are always thinking about you. We're your real family. She scrolled through with trembling fingers. The messages continued. Mommy is always working. Her experiments are more important than you. Did you know that Daddy left because of Mommy? Having a child like you has ruined Mommy's life. Imagine what would happen to you if we weren't around. If you tell Mommy, we'll never let you see us again. This is our secret. The messages went on endlessly, all with similar content. Malicious words designed to destroy Elizabeth and Harper's relationship and implant the idea that her parents and sister were the real family. It wasn't just unkind words. It was planned, systematic psychological abuse. When she reached yesterday's message, Elizabeth gasped. Ready for tomorrow's presentation? The collage that Grandma specially helped you with will surprise your teacher. But this is our secret too. If you show it to Mommy, you'll never be able to see us again. Elizabeth continued scrolling. She moved to the photo folder and found pictures she hadn't seen before. Photos of the I, My Family, a project collage that Harper had supposedly been preparing. It completely excluded Elizabeth's image, instead depicting only the grandparents and aunt as a family. Even more shocking, at the edge of the collage were small letters saying, Mommy is always busy and doesn't care about me. They made you create this? Elizabeth's voice trembled. Harper nodded, crying. They said if I didn't do what they said, they'd take away my toys and I wouldn't be able to see Mommy anymore. And today, you were told to present this at school? Yes, but I couldn't. Harper struggled with her words. When I stood in front of everyone, the teacher looked at the collage with a strange expression, and then suddenly, I couldn't breathe. As Elizabeth listened to her daughter's words, she was overwhelmed by a mixture of anger and sadness. Her parents and sister had been manipulating and psychologically abusing her daughter behind her back for months, and today, that pressure had become too much for Harper's small body to bear, and she had collapsed. Elizabeth gently put down the tablet and embraced her daughter. Listen, Harper, she said, looking into her daughter's eyes. This is absolutely not your fault. Everything Grandpa, Grandma, and Aunt Vanessa said is a lie. You are the most important thing in the world to me. Having you has made my life wonderful. Harper's crying subsided a little. And I will protect you from anyone, even if that means... Elizabeth faltered for a moment, but continued with strong determination. Even if that means protecting you from Grandpa and Grandma. Harper buried her face in her mother's chest. I was scared. It's okay now, Elizabeth said, stroking her daughter's hair. Mommy is here with you. She stared at the tablet. Months of documented evidence. A calculated betrayal by the family she had trusted. Anger shook her entire body. Elizabeth pressed the nurse call button and said to the nurse who came, Could you call Dr. Summers? And if possible, the child's psychologist, Dr. Jenkins as well. The nurse seemed to sense the situation and nodded immediately. I'll call them right away. Left alone in the room again, Elizabeth held her daughter's small body and gazed out the window. The rain had started falling from the cloudy sky. In her heart, a storm of sadness and anger was raging. When Dr. Summers and Dr. Jenkins entered the room, Elizabeth was sitting quietly by the bed of the now sleeping Harper, holding the tablet. The doctors seemed to sense from Elizabeth's expression that something serious had happened. Ms. Morrison, has something happened? Dr. Summers asked quietly. Elizabeth looked up and said in a trembling voice, Yes, I found evidence of the abuse my daughter has been experiencing. Abuse? Both the doctor and psychologist widened their eyes. Psychological abuse? Elizabeth held out the tablet, planned over a long period by my parents and sister. Choking on her words, she continued. They were manipulating my daughter behind my back, trying to destroy our relationship. Doctor. Jenkins took the tablet and reviewed the messages with Dr. Summers. Their expressions gradually became severe. This is clearly a case of child psychological abuse, the psychologist said, maintaining professional composure despite the anger in her voice. Emotional manipulation of a child, deliberate destruction of the parent-child relationship, threats, all of these are serious abusive behaviors. Dr. Summers turned to Elizabeth. We need to report this to Child Protective Services. We should also consider notifying the police. Elizabeth nodded, holding her daughter's small hand. What should I do? First, we'll create a detailed report, Doctor. Summers said. The tablet is important evidence of Harper's abuse. Let's keep it safely until we can submit it to the police. And, Doctor, Jenkins continued, we need to have a thorough discussion with Harper. She needs professional support to feel safe enough to tell the truth. Elizabeth looked at her sleeping daughter's face and steeled her resolve. I want to talk with her as soon as possible, when she wakes up. At that moment, Harper moaned softly and opened her eyes. She looked around in confusion, then showed relief when she recognized her mother. Mommy, I'm here, honey. Elizabeth gently stroked her daughter's hair. Everything's going to be all right now. Doctor. Jenkins stepped forward. Harper, my name is Dr. Jenkins. I'd like to talk with you a little. Is that okay? Harper fearfully looked up at her mother. Elizabeth nodded slowly and gently said, She's on our side. You don't need to be afraid. Did you see the messages on the tablet? Harper's voice was trembling. I did, Elizabeth answered honestly. Everything Grandpa, Grandma, and Aunt Vanessa said is wrong. You are my treasure. I couldn't live without you. Tears welled up in Harper's eyes. I was scared. Grandpa said if I told, I'd never see Mommy again. That will never happen, Elizabeth said firmly. No one can separate us. Doctor. Jenkins spoke to Harper in a gentle voice. Harper, can you tell us everything that Grandpa, Grandma, and your aunt did? Don't be afraid. You haven't done anything wrong. Harper began to talk little by little. At first reluctantly, but gradually the words flowed more easily. She spoke about the indoctrination that took place every time she stayed at her grandparents' house. Disguised real family was not Elizabeth but them, and how they had manipulated her school project. As she listened to the story, Elizabeth's heart felt like it would burst. She couldn't understand why the family she had trusted would try to separate her from Harper. Why they would do such a thing, Elizabeth murmured. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and a nurse hurriedly entered. Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry. Your family has returned and appears to be heading to the room. Elizabeth's spine froze. She looked at the doctor and psychologist. Please don't let them into the room. Doctor. Summers immediately instructed the nurse, call security, and tell them that visiting is restricted for the patient's rest. Elizabeth stood up. No, I'll meet them. She clutched the tablet in her trembling hand. Doctor. Jenkins, would you stay with Harper? The psychologist nodded, saying, Of course. Elizabeth took a deep breath and headed for the door. It's time to put an end to this situation. In the hallway, her parents and sister were standing in front of the nurse's station. Their expressions, unlike before, now looked concerned. Elizabeth closed the door to the room and approached them with determined steps. Elizabeth, her mother Martha smiled. How is Harper? Don't you think it would be better to let her rest a bit more and then take her to our house? You have work, don't you? That's right, her father George agreed. Rest is best for children. We'll take care of her so you don't need to worry. Vanessa nodded. That's right, your stress is affecting Harper. Don't you think it would be best to stay apart for a while? Elizabeth listened to their words, trying to maintain her composure. However, the gap between the evidence she had seen on the tablet and the false kindness she was hearing now fueled her anger. I've seen Harper's tablet, Elizabeth said quietly but firmly. The three expressions froze instantly. What are you talking about? George asked, but there was obvious tension in his voice. The abusive messages that you all have been sending to my daughter for months. Elizabeth held up the tablet. It's all here. Mommy cares more about work than you. Your existence has ruined Mommy's life. We are your real family. What are these ugly words? The color drained from Martha's face. That's a misunderstanding. We were just a misunderstanding? Elizabeth's voice grew slightly louder. There is no misunderstanding about threatening, manipulating, and trying to separate an 8-year-old child from her mother. Calm down, Vanessa said coolly, like the lawyer she was. You're exaggerating the situation. We were just trying to help Harper. Help? Elizabeth said incredulously. You psychologically abused my daughter until she collapsed at school. At that moment, security guards and police officers appeared in the hallway. Doctor, Summers must have contacted them. What's going on? One of the officers asked. Elizabeth took a deep breath and explained the situation as calmly as possible. These people are my parents and sister. They have been psychologically abusing my daughter over a long period. The evidence is here. She handed the tablet to the officer. This is outrageous. George suddenly raised his voice. We are top-tier doctors and lawyers. Do you intend to believe such ridiculous claims? You're an unfit mother. Martha also exploded with anger. Can you imagine what would have happened to Harper without us? You're always working. At that moment, other patients and medical staff in the hallway turned to look. The true nature of the three was exposed in public. The officer checked the contents of the tablet and looked sternly at George and the others. We need to discuss this further in a separate room. Elizabeth placed her trembling hand on her chest, staring at her family's angry faces. It was the moment their masks fell away, revealing their true selves. 3 months later, on a Sunday morning with soft spring sunshine enveloping Seattle, Elizabeth was making pancakes in the kitchen, listening to Harper's laughter coming from the living room. Mom, look at this. Elizabeth wiped her flour-covered hands and headed to the living room. Harper was working on colorful papers spread out on the table. A new My Family project, this time created by her own will. It's beautiful. Elizabeth placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. The collage included photos of Elizabeth and Harper, as well as images of the new family that had recently joined their lives. Members of the single mother support group that Elizabeth had joined. They gathered for brunch every Sunday, letting the children play in the park while the parents shared life's joys and concerns. I included Aunt Lisa, Aunt Kate, and Aunt Emma, Harper said proudly, and David, Sophia, and Tyler, pointing to the children's names. Something more important than blood ties, Elizabeth smiled. We've learned what real family means. After the incident, a restraining order was issued against Elizabeth's parents and sister. Based on the findings of Child Protective Services, they were never allowed near Harper again. Their reputation in the community collapsed. George received a severe warning from the Medical Association, and Martha was expelled from the Retired Nurses Association. Vanessa was fired from her law firm, and the three moved to another state. The civil lawsuit Elizabeth had filed was still in progress, and they were facing the consequences of their years of possessiveness and control. Harper met with a kind and understanding therapist twice a week, gradually healing her wounds. At first, she suffered from nightmares, but now her smile had returned, and she was enjoying time with friends at school. Elizabeth's workplace also showed understanding of her situation and introduced a flexible working system. This allowed her to continue her important research while still having time to attend Harper's school events and make dinner together. Mom, what time are we going to brunch today? Harper asked. At 11. Let's eat our pancakes before then, Elizabeth smiled. Would you like to help? Harper ran happily into the kitchen. As Elizabeth watched her daughter's retreating figure, she was filled with deep gratitude. The unforgettable scene from that hospital room was still vivid in her memory, but it had left her with a valuable lesson. True family is not bound by blood alone, but created through love, respect, and mutual support. Now, a warm circle of chosen family bound by such ties surrounded her and Harper. It was a bond far stronger than blood, a true connection. As the sweet aroma of pancakes spread throughout the house, mother and daughter enjoyed their new Sunday tradition. Their hearts were no longer filled with fear, but with hope for the future.